Hi everyone, and thanks for tuning in to another episode of Cult Driven.
Today, we're going to be restoring the cold air intake on the MR2.
My MR2 came with a cold air intake that was installed by the previous owner, but unfortunately the paint on it is in really rough shape, and it's actually got a lot of overspray that's on the inside, and there's even paint chips that are flaking off in there.
Yeah, generally the only thing you want getting through your intake is air. So we have a situation here where we have some paint flakes and some rust that could possibly get into the firing chamber, which is not ideal.
Usually you can just replace the intake tube because they're pretty cheap, but in this case I couldn't find a piece for my engine that was just a solid piece of metal. So I'm going to take the one that I have and sand it down, get rid of all the rust, all the paint, and we're going to refinish it from the ground up. Before we can even think about paint, we'll need to take everything off of this rusty pipe. That includes the hose clamps, coupler, the old air filter, which we'll be replacing instead of cleaning, and for where the mass airflow sensor is connected, a rubber grommet, which is in good enough shape to set aside and reuse. The front of the intake was held in place with a bracket that I couldn't unbolt while it was in the car, so I took the whole thing out to give myself more room to try to attack it. It still didn't want to budge, so I climbed my way up the ladder of heavier and heavier tools. The struggles continued when even penetrating bolt remover had no effect, and all my hand tools wanted to do was strip the bolt and slip off. After a while of that, I switched to my locking pliers to get a firmer grip, and I heated up the bolt with my lighter to expand the metal, which finally let me crack it with my breaker bar. I was able to catch my breath while ratcheting it the rest of the way off to get it out of the way for the next step. With the bracket out of the picture, I could finally get to sanding and grinding all the old paint and rust away. The outside may have been ugly, but the actual problem was the paint on the inside of the pipe. I tackled that with a wire wheel and sandpaper. With all the rust gone, I cleaned the metal surface thoroughly with wax and grease remover to make sure it was properly prepped for paint. With the outside ready to go, I used masking tape to protect the inside from overspray. I covered both ends and left about an inch of buffer room, which will be covered by the air filter and coupler when it's all done. I also made sure to cover the hole for the MAP sensor. I did a final inspection to make sure I didn't miss anything and decided it was ready for paint. Since I'm painting directly to bare metal, my first layer of paint is a self-etching primer, which I applied in 3 thin coats, allowing plenty of time to dry in between. The top coat was a high temperature black paint that should easily stand up to the heat inside of an engine bay. With everything dry to the touch, the masking tape can come off and we can take a look at the results, which I'm really happy with, especially considering how far gone this was when I started. Now all that's left is to put everything back together and see how it looks in the engine bay. I popped the grommet back on with the help of some silicone lubricant before clamping on my new air filter, which was actually an inch too big but came with a rubber reducer insert that gives a snug airtight fit. The last step was installing it back onto the engine with a new coupler, where it's secured tightly with hose clamps and bolted back into the bracket with some fresh hardware that won't stick next time. And there it is. The engine bay looks a lot better, and all it took was about $7 worth of paint and a few hours of work. Thanks again for watching, and stay tuned for the next episode.